recording this shortly. This is for the 1st Congressional District. We'll be just asking you both a series of questions to try to get to know you and inform our endorsement. So we just kind of like to open this up at first. If you both could just introduce yourselves, your party affiliation, give us a brief overview of why you were running for this seat. Start with you.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Bonamici, and I currently represent the 1st Congressional District of Oregon, which is the northwest 1/6 of the state. I am passionate about public education, climate change, housing, and several other issues of importance to Oregonians. I worked my way through community college at Lane Community College for 2 years, U of O for 2 years, U of O Law School for 3 years, all on my own. I was a consumer protection lawyer for a while in Washington, D.C. at the Federal Trade Commission, and then came back to Oregon and worked for a law firm for a while. Then I became an education advocate. I served in the state legislature, both in the House and the Senate, and then in the beginning of 2012, I was elected to represent the 1st Congressional District. I'm running for re-election because there are so many issues of importance to Oregonians that I have been working on, and there's still work to do. Even though we have made some progress on some of these key issues, have built the relationships and established the reputation of someone who connects with the people in Oregon, works across the aisle, gets things done, even in challenging circumstances. So I'm running for re-election to continue that work.
Sure. Hello, my name's Joe Chrisman. Day job, I'm a computer programmer. Night job, I'm on the executive board of the Libertarian Party of Oregon, and I do a lot of martial arts, kind of MMA, jiu-jitsu, that kind of thing. The primary reason I'm running is that I've just been horrified by what's been going on with Gaza, and I felt like both parties have been enabling it. And Basically, I want to speak out, and I want to do whatever I can to put an end to what's happening there. I've been particularly horrified by what I've seen as the Biden-Harris administration's enablement of these horrors. So that's my primary reason, but of course, as a libertarian, we have our things, we believe that drug laws should be more liberal. We believe people should be allowed to live their life as they please to the maximum degree possible if they're not harming other people. But yeah, the primary reason I'm running in this particular race is Gaza.
Thank you.
I neglected to say that I'm a Democrat. I'll add that to my...
You hold office in Oregon, we kind of figured. Could you elaborate a little on what you would like to see the next presidential administration do about the situation in Gaza, the horrors in Gaza?
Yeah, I think you just have to stop enabling Netanyahu, frankly, because I think at this point we've just seen enablement after enablement, and none of this has actually resulted in something like, I think Biden called it bear hug diplomacy, but at this point it just seems to be expanding. Like now they're invading Lebanon, and now it's looking like back and forth with Iran is starting up. So it's not enclosing, it's expanding. So it just seems like a horrifying failure policy, and I think there has to actually be consequences for Netanyahu, because at this point I think he's felt like he's had impunity for so long. I kind of don't blame him with thinking he could get away with anything. So I think you're going to have to do things like stop sending weapons, start saying, hey, if you don't pull this down, we're not going to send any weapons, we're not going to send any money, we're not going to run cover for you in the UN.
Okay. Congresswoman, I think it's fair to say that a lot of Portlanders are upset by what they're seeing on the news in Gaza. And, when it comes to local races or state house races, we try to quash that conversation down a little bit, just simply because it's not something that's within the purview of the job.
Sure.
But in this case, I think it's a little different. This is within the purview of the job, I think.
It is, right.
And you're, I imagine, troubled by what you're seeing on the television news.
Absolutely troubled by it, no doubt.
What should Portlanders want from people in Congress when it comes to this issue, and what are you delivering?
Yeah, well, let me just state at the outset, I am also extremely concerned about what we're seeing in the Middle East, particularly recently, but really for quite a long time. October 7th was horrific, no doubt, but I want to back up a step and say, I care about this issue deeply. I've been to Israel multiple times, both as a private citizen visiting friends who live there, and as a member of Congress. I've spoken with Israelis, I've spoken with Palestinians, I've visited areas in the West Bank, I've spoken with Israeli leaders and Palestinian leaders, and have for a long time been a strong supporter of a two-state solution where people can live in peace. And I'm obviously very, very concerned about what I'm seeing there. I called for a bilateral ceasefire back in November. October, a month later, I called for a bilateral ceasefire. Bilateral meaning it can't just be one side. Both sides have to agree to that. And importantly, the return of the hostages, which is still an issue. I have a constituent in Beaverton whose brother is still a hostage. I mean, there are still many, many concerns that I have about the failure to get the hostages out and to really approach this as it needs to be approached, to de-escalate and to get humanitarian aid in there to Gaza. I mean, I spoke with people from Gaza the last time I was over there, which was before October 7th, but I know how challenging it's been for the region. I agree with those who understand that Israel has the right to exist, but I absolutely 100% agree that there needs to be de-escalation, there needs to be more done to move toward a ceasefire. I was extremely disappointed when Donald Trump, the former occupant of the White House, got us out of the Iran nuclear deal, which was keeping a check on Iran, and that was a very dangerous move. So obviously I'm very, very concerned. So I have supported massive amount of humanitarian aid, also very worried that enough of that is not reaching the people who need it. But there are innocent people who are Palestinians, and there are innocent people who are Israelis who do not agree with the approach of Prime Minister Netanyahu.
Are there votes you've taken on this that you would point to, or does this just not fall into what you do?
Well, there was a vote to get humanitarian aid, and what I said at the time was there was one opportunity to get $9 billion of humanitarian aid across the finish line. It also included some weaponry, but a lot of that was defensive. And as we saw, when the missiles were coming in and bombs were coming in from Iran, a lot of those were deflected because they have tools like David's Sling and the Iron Dome. It also had some offensive aid. Not all of that was delivered. I made a statement at the time and firmly believe that had I been given the option, I would have preferred to vote for the humanitarian aid and the defensive aid, but that wasn't the option that was given to me. So that was the most recent vote that I took. But over the years, I supported the Obama administration's, it was called JCPOA, which is an acronym for something, but it was the Iran nuclear deal that gave us a check on Iran. So again, I do believe that Israel has the right to exist, and know that there are people there who are under fire today, and I'm extremely concerned. I mean, I share Joe's concerns about what's happening in Gaza. It's devastating.
Okay.
You have a bit of a history of education and consumer trade regulation.
Right.
So I wanted to ask you about social media and kids. And so, we have the...
Great topic. Yeah,
and so we have, the Surgeon General saying there should be a black box on it. I think we're doing a story right now just about, kind of how schools are trying to keep cell phones out of kids' hands to protect them. So what do you think should be done? And, is enough being done on the federal level to kind of regulate this?
I don't think enough is being done right now, and I think we need a combination, because I'm a firm believer in free speech, but I also understand the dangers of disinformation and misinformation and social media addiction and things that are affecting students. So I've been working both in Congress in a couple different realms. The big Children's Protection Privacy Bill is going through what's called the Energy and Commerce Committee, not the Education Committee, but I'm tracking that. I also have been, I'm a member of the Bipartisan AI Task Force, and so we're looking at what we can do in that realm to protect privacy rights, but also to protect children. And then I'm also working closely with state leaders here in Oregon, superintendents and others who are working on AI privacy policies, security policies, and I've also spoken with experts, both people in the medical field, OHSU folks, about social media and children. So I don't think there's enough being done right now, but I think a lot of it is in education, age-appropriate education about media literacy and privacy rights, but also understanding how social media is affecting children.
Joe, as a libertarian figure, you might have a slightly different view on this. What is your take?
Sure, I think we have to be super careful when it comes to interaction between the government and social media, because social media basically is the public platform right now. You know, it's the idea of when you speak in public, kind of what the First Amendment was made for. The idea was clearly political speech, that public forum be very closely protected. And I think that we have seen, like what comes to mind is the Twitter leaks that Matt Taibbi did, that those lines have been crossed. So you have to be very careful. Like, I don't think it's the government's role to regulate misinformation, disinformation, or anything like that, because frankly, it's an opinion most of the time. Like, when you read fact-checked articles, sometimes they're right. I've read ones that I know are completely wrong, and there's also manipulation that can be done with that kind of thing. Like, let's say the fact-check writer is sympathetic to something that has a questionable thing with the truth. What you could say is mostly true, and then you'll say the beginning will make it sound like that, and then all the contradictory information will be free force of the way into the article, which, as journalists know, most people will never read. So I think you have to be very careful entering that realm, and I don't think that that's not what government's place, misinformation, disinformation. As far as regulation around children go, yes, I do think for people under 13 should probably at least be given to a limited section of social media, and obviously the privacy of any minors needs to be deeply protected, their personal information, and the social media networks do have a child predator issue that does need to be clamped down on more. But
So are there policies you think the federal government should be doing to address both of those issues?
I think that there could be something around, say, the privacy of under 18s and how that information is stored. Because, if you sign up to get a Facebook account, you sign up to get a Twitter account, you usually have to give a lot of information. And I think there is a place to make sure that information is stored in, let's say, more careful way than you would for adults. Facebook is infamous for selling your info to everyone, but I think there should probably be some regulations on that for under 18s.
Thank you. Okay, I want to ask you both, if reelected or elected, what's the first issue you want to bring up? What's the first policy you want to see enacted? What is your number one priority? So I'll start with you.
Codify Roe versus Wade. Obviously, the attacks on women's reproductive freedom has been very, very concerning. Here in Oregon, we respect the right of people to make their own reproductive health care decisions. That's something that should be made by the patient and the healthcare provider. But we're seeing the repercussions across the country of what Donald Trump bragged about, which was getting rid of Roe versus Wade. Lots of other issues to work on as well, but that one's really number one. We need to get that done. We hadn't had the votes to do that previously, but this time we will.
You seeing any numbers yet of the number of women who are coming to Oregon seeking abortions?
No, just anecdotal. I know, particularly with Idaho, but from other nearby states, Planned Parenthood's working on getting their clinic up and running over in Ontario, and we have definitely seen repercussions here, and other states that respect reproductive freedom have been seeing it as well. Some states are trying to ban people from traveling, which is horrific, but so far I don't know that those have gone in, but we do know that other states are trying to do that. So even though Oregon respects that reproductive freedom, we can see the effects if, for example, heaven forbid there's a Trump-Vance administration, even though they say they won't sign a national abortion ban. I don't believe them for a moment, because it's something they've bragged about. So this is a really critical issue that's affecting people across the country. And as we've seen recently, and a little shout out to, I know Oregon sometimes collaborates with ProPublica, but they really highlighted the women in Georgia, but that's happened in other states as well, that women are trying to get the health care they need, and they could be on their deathbed, and some of them have actually lost their lives because they're not getting access to that care.
All right, thanks.
I mean, as a libertarian, they probably would not want to work with me initially because Congress is essentially a collaborative group, so it's unlikely I would get what I want immediately. But in our perfect world, she mentioned ProPublica, and actually they did do some interesting reporting recently, basically revealing that Anthony Blinken ignored information that he reports that he was getting from his own department about how Israel was blocking aid into Gaza. And there are laws on the book that say that if there is a country that is blocking American aid into a zone, then we can't give them weapons. And I think that is something that I would like to see actually enforced here.
Great, thank you. I want to turn to the issue of, let's just say fentanyl. I want to ask you both whether you think the federal government has an increased role in regulating the drug. I mean, we see Oregon basically legalized it and then walked it back. I mean, is that a sign that we need to see more aggressive moves by the federal government to regulate it? And like, what would those moves look like?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, sorry.
I'm pretty sure they decriminalized it, which is technically different,
Yeah.
different than legalizing it. But there's more that everybody can be doing, and the fentanyl crisis is something that we need to be working on at the federal, state, local levels with nonprofits and everyone. It is a real concern. I've worked with the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency, because of the I-5 corridor, and there's more that can be done there, but they are working really hard on stopping that flow. I think we're starting to see that take effect. There have been proposals that this current congressional Republican would not let come to the floor for a vote to do more tracking at the border, but also here locally at home. I have a bipartisan bill called the FACTS Act, which is fentanyl awareness for students and teens in schools. Wait, that's not facts. Fentanyl awareness for children and teens in schools. FACTS Act. It's bipartisan. I'm working on that with a Republican colleague from California because we both had constituents who lost their children to fentanyl overdoses. And so the Beaverton School District has a curriculum called Fake and Fatal. And since they implemented it in Beaverton, there hasn't been a fentanyl death among their students, and Oregon's ramping that up statewide. We want to do that federally, and I'm hoping we can get that over the finish line. But again, this is something that is deeply affecting our communities. Another thing that I'm doing on a bipartisan basis, I have a bipartisan bill based on the Central City Concern Transportation Program called CHEERS. It's an acronym again, and I'll get it to you.
This is the same Cheers as like the Cheers van that people.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Thank you. So it's not CHE or
CHI.
You guys have a different
Right.
acronym, but
Right.
yeah, it's the same.
Right. It's the
Newcomers
same.
to Portland may not know it, but
Yes. Thank you.
everybody
Yes.
who's been here 10 years knows
Right.
the Cheers van.
Yes.
That's the drunk tank
So-
on wheels.
Exactly. One of the things that I've heard again and again when I'm out talking to people particularly in Portland, but it's not just a Portland, it's not just an urban issue, it's everywhere, is that they need to transport people to treatment, and that's a barrier. So this is a bipartisan bill to replicate that CHEERS program and have that transportation provided so when somebody's ready to get treatment, they can get it. I did a ride-along recently with the Portland Fire and Rescue, and there was a call, there was a woman on a bench down by the river, and she agreed that she wanted to go to treatment. And the only way they could do this is to take her to Emmanuel because Unity was full. So when we have these transport and we need more treatment, but that's another issue too, is that we need to ramp up that workforce so we have more treatment.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit, just because we had a Cheers van, and I, as far as I'm aware, we lost it.
Right.
Why does the federal government now need to be involved? I mean, are you guys basically slapping Portland on the wrist and saying
No, we're
you
not
need
slapping
to do
Portland
this
on the
again? Or
wrist.
like,
We
why are they involved in the federal government?
Well, because this is an issue that people really care about, and it's something that we can do, is to help fill that gap. and it's something that I've heard, my colleague who's co-sponsoring that, Don Bacon from the Midwest, we are hearing that this is a barrier. Same thing with my recovery housing bill, which is bipartisan. People need a place where they can recover once they get treatment before they go back to the workforce and to society, and there aren't enough places to do that. The federal government, through HUD, runs a pilot program for recovery housing, but it's only limited to a certain number of states. It was created in 2018. We know it's working, so let's expand that through my bipartisan bill to every state. So when there's a place where we can be helping, and it's a current concern that we're hearing about from our constituents, yes, of course, we can do that.
Is it primarily a funding issue? Is that
Yes, that's my understanding. I mean,
Yeah.
organizations like Central City Concern and the other nonprofits that are working in this space, they're pretty strapped. They're working hard. They're, they have, their staff and their mission, but it's just a barrier that we've heard about. So, and it worked when it was around, so let's bring it back.
Thanks. Joe, what do you think about the federal government's involvement in regulating drugs like fentanyl?
I mean, the federal government created this problem in the first place. This is a consequence of the war on drugs. The idea that most people, they don't want fentanyl. Usually it's some other drug you want, like, let's just say cocaine. Let's just say you buy some cocaine and they're cutting it with fentanyl. Now, if somebody dies from that because they're getting the wrong thing, I think that's murder, and I think it should be prosecuted as such. But you have to ask what created this situation, and I think it's that people who buy drugs obviously can't go to the police. Like if I buy cocaine from someone, let's just say, and I think they're cutting it with fentanyl, it's not like I could just call up the cops, hey, I bought some cocaine from so-and-so, and I think he's cutting it with fentanyl. That's not going to happen. So the idea that this ever happened in the first place is a consequence of the war on drugs, and I think this should be all treated. This is the reason that all the drugs have to be put together, because like things like marijuana legalization, that's nice, obviously, but I think that what's going to be safer in the long term is that you're going to have is legalizing all of it, and it's a controversial position. But I think in the long term, when it comes to actually being able to regulate this stuff, that's going to be the consequence. And of course, there will still be drug problems at that time, but this current fentanyl problem, I think, is almost entirely a consequence of federal and local policies around the war on drugs.
So you'd legalize fentanyl?
Yeah.
So how would you address, we're seeing these massive overdoses, a lot of people are dying. So what would be your strategy is that a problem, and what would be your strategy to address that?
Again, with the overdoses, a lot of the time it's people who don't even know what they're getting. A lot of the time it's people who don't even know they're getting fentanyl, and it's a much stronger drug than these other drugs. So if they're taking their normal dose and they get a ton of fentanyl in there, that could be a big cause of these overdoses. But at the end of the day, there will never be any perfection. There's people who die from alcohol right now, and it's nice to prevent that, but we live in a country of freedom, and some of the times when you have that freedom, that means you can make bad choices, and I think to some degree we're always going to have to accept that, but I think a lot of the current problem is a direct result of the war on drugs.
Can I respond to that?
Sure.
I just have to say that the notion of legalizing fentanyl would be extremely disappointing to the people I've met who've lost children and family members to fentanyl. And with regard to the you can't call the police, there's been a lot of movement on the 911 immunity issue, and that's something I worked on in the state legislature, particularly at that time for college campuses, that we don't want anyone to hesitate to call for help because they might have a substance that they could be cited for. So there's a 911 immunity. There's ways to address that issue without legalizing fentanyl, which is extremely concerning to me.
Great. I want to move to education briefly. We had a couple people come in, mainly I think from the Republican Party, saying that Oregon was kind of reducing standards to graduate as a way to kind of prop up a failing education system and make it look better. I was just wondering, the outcomes in education in Oregon look bad, and it's especially with attendance, that looks very bad. And so I'm just wondering, is there a role in the federal government in kind of setting higher standards in Oregon, or ways to kind of help the state improve?
I'll tell you the role of the federal government, and it's an important one. Most people understand that education funding and curriculum decisions are made at the state and local level, as they should be. The role of the federal government is really about civil rights and opportunity gaps, closing opportunity gaps. And the education laws really came about in the Civil Rights era, the Higher Education Act, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, which unfortunately became No Child Left Behind, which was well-intentioned, bad results, and things like Title I to get more resources to districts that have a high population of low-income students. School nutrition programs, again, to help close those gaps so that every student in the United States, regardless of their neighborhood or their zip code or their family income, has that opportunity to learn and thrive. And so that's the federal role, is to really close those gaps. And that's why one of the reasons I went to Congress was to get rid of No Child Left Behind, because it had, to me, it felt like, and I kept hearing in my education work in the legislature, the negative consequences because there was too much emphasis put on test scores. And if students weren't doing well, the whole school would be labeled as failing. And that's the wrong approach. First of all, school's a building. If the students aren't doing well, the questions need to be asked. Why aren't these students doing well? Are the class sizes too big? Is there lead in the water? Are they hungry? Do they not have arts and music and things that keep them engaged? So that is, getting rid of No Child Left Behind was something I worked really hard to do. And in 2015, we passed the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was leaving behind No Child Left Behind. And I'm still working on that. Unfortunately, we had 4 years of Secretary DeVos, who had absolutely no interest in public education and was more interested in privatizing it. And then we had a pandemic. So now that we're basically through those, and hopefully won't have, I know the Moms for Liberty head wants to be education secretary, which kind of makes my mind explode, but hopefully when we have an education secretary, I don't know if Secretary Cardona is staying, but a secretary like that who is committed to improving public education, we can start seeing ESSA implemented with fidelity. And that's going to help with all these issues. I'm a big supporter of arts and music education. In fact, I have an Arts Education for All bill, and it's not just a frill. It, number one, it helps keep students engaged in school, helps them be more creative and innovative, gives them a place to express their individuality and become creative and innovative, which is what we want in our workforce. The Surgeon General, who you mentioned earlier, has said music is medicine. So when we bring in these programs, when we have a well-rounded education that engages students and keeps them in school and makes them thrive and helps them thrive, we're going to see things change.
Thank you. Joe, what do you think? What is the role of the federal government in improving Oregon's education system?
I think there's always a risk the further away you get from the local community as to what the impact. Like, the one thing it sounds like we agree on is No Child Left Behind was a disaster. I mean, for reasons she was, I think specifically on, specifically on the test score front, I do think it creates an incentive where good teachers won't want to go to the schools that have the bad test scores, because then they'll basically be facing the consequences, and not all schools start from the same place. And I mean, even in like a perfect world, you're going to have some classes are probably going to do better than others. And I think that there has been a tendency on some of my fellow people on the right to blame it on the teachers that I don't think is always correct, because there will always be a natural degree of that. Now, I think the federal government, if there is like some actual civil rights violation going on, that's obviously a place for it, but I think you have to be very careful with funding, or very careful to not be intervening in these communities too much. And I think it makes sense to keep it as local as possible, because people have very different things that they have, like culturally, that they want their kids to know. Like, we see that with all the fights over what books should be in school and what should not, and I think that should be the school board problem, really. I think that it should be kept as close as possible to each school.
Great. Aaron, you have any more questions?
I don't.
Great. Okay.
Well, actually, I do. Sorry. I always say no, and
Then get it going.
This is an odd question, I suppose, but I just am curious what this is a personal question, I suppose. Last year, you and your husband were hit by a car.
Not too far from here.
Not very far from here.
Beginning of last year, Friday the 13th.
A horrible experience that I'm sure is personally traumatizing. And I'm not really trying to get you to unpack your personal trauma so much as just ask the question of did anything from that experience change your thinking around transportation policy, around public safety?
It didn't change it, but it certainly enhanced it. And I've always been, a strong supporter of transit and bicycle trails and people's ability to get from place to place in a safe way. But after that happened, and just for the record, we were in the crosswalk and had the light, and the car came around the corner and hit us both. And I had a concussion. It was pretty traumatic. So I have been much more aware of and working on issues about pedestrian safety. In fact, some of the dollars I've been able to bring back to Oregon deal with some of the pedestrian safety issues, like the Beaverton Loop, for example. And it is an issue that I care about deeply, but not just from my personal experience. I mean, it made it more real, obviously. But I think about, the people who want their kids to be able to walk or bike to school or, cross streets. So TV Highway, I got some money to help with TV Highway. Really dangerous corridor there. So we can make that safer for people. So I would say it didn't really change it, but it certainly made me more aware of the needs.
Sure.
Actually, I want to ask you both. Should we have a single-payer healthcare system?
Yes.
And so what is the path to get there in the short
Well,
term?
I wasn't in Congress when the Affordable Care Act passed. I was in state legislature at the time, but it was really designed to do two things: to bring consumer protections to people who had employer-provided health care, but also create a marketplace so individuals and people who wanted to leave a job or change jobs or start a business could have a place to buy insurance. They couldn't get a public option in there. They tried, but they didn't have the support at the time. And I've been, of course, following the need for affordable health care since. And yes, we've made some progress on things like lowering the cost of insulin, but in prescription drugs for people on Medicare, we need to do that for everybody. But the bottom line on our current healthcare system is that it's too expensive, it's too complicated, and too many people are left out of it. So what we need to do is just continue to build awareness about the gaps that we have and how, when we look at other models, we spend more and we get less, and there's too many people left out.
What do you think about single-payer?
I'm actually a maybe on this one. I think that without a doubt the current system is just a complete disaster, and I don't think it's a free market system, and it's not a single socialist system or whatever term you want to use for that. It's some weird chimera, so a lot of the time you get like the bureaucracy and such that you would expect in a more socialist-y system, but you also get the price gouging you get in a free market system, so you have this utter nightmare. So I would be more sympathetic. So I would be sympathetic to turns to go more free market, but honestly, this pisses off some fellow libertarians, but at the end of the day, this system is such a disaster. A good single-payer system with a lot of safeguards around things, like not forcing certain health outcomes. Like I know people are very concerned about forcing vaccines and stuff like that. I think we have to be very careful not to have safeguards like that. But if a good single-payer system might be an improvement.
So basically what you're saying is that the current system is so bad that you'd actually be willing to look at a single-payer system. So my question to you is, why do you think the United States has such a broken system?
I think it's a lot of just over time, okay, we see this problem, okay, let's put on a Band-Aid. We see this problem, let's put on a Band-Aid. Oh, all these Band-Aids are causing problems, let's put a Band-Aid on the Band-Aids on the Band-Aids, until eventually you just have such a nightmare that it's hard to even untangle.
Could I just follow up on that real briefly? When you look back historically, our system was set up as an employer-provided healthcare system. And, people went to work and that's where their healthcare came from, but the economy has changed so much since that time. There are a lot of people who are entrepreneurs who maybe don't work a traditional job. And so we've moved so far away from the system that was created, and the healthcare system did not keep up with the economic changes in the structure of our families.
Great. Okay, we have a fun question for both of you.
You always say it's fun.
Hopefully this one actually is. The fun question is, what were you best known for in high school? And like a good example is, some people are like, I voted best so-and-so, but someone told us that they were the, worst player on their JV soccer team 4 years in a row, something like that. What were you best known for in high school?
Least likely to be a member of Congress.
Why did people think that?
Well, I just say, when I was in high school, I was like working and going to parties and not really focused on government or policy making. Sometimes people say, did you always want to be a member of Congress? And I wanted to be a ballerina, and that didn't work out. But probably least likely to be a member of Congress.
Great, thank you.
I'd say I'd probably say I was a bit of a class clown, but I was also always the one that the teachers wanted to hear from because they always felt like I'd have some unique perspective on everything. So, the teachers liked me despite me being a pain in the ass. So, yeah, I guess a likable pain in the ass. Let's just go with that.
Great, thank you. Well, great. Thank you both for coming in.
I'd be honored to earn your endorsement.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate seeing you.
I was going to give you. I was going to give. I have the acronym in here. It's the Connections to Health, Infrastructure, and Emergency Recovery Services. Cheers.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Not easy to keep in the.
No, not at all, but that's fine.